Hi everybody. So here I am up on Guanella Pass to start out our virtual hikes. And a minute ago you could see Mount Beardstadt behind me, but the clouds are moving in and it has now become hidden behind those. We'll see how long I can stay out here before the lightning and thunder begins. I felt a couple raindrops, but we'll see what we can find. Right now, and I'm probably at about 12,000 feet, I'm guessing. I'm just above timberline. And I'm seeing lots of flowers out here that hopefully we can explore before the weather turns. And I'll try to talk about some adaptations as I go along, because some of the alpine plants really have some cool adaptations to survive in this really harsh environment with the winds and the short growing season and all of those challenging obstacles that our plants have to deal with at this elevation. So anyway, I will join you in a minute once I find my first plant. So I'm just starting to walk and I've already spotted a few things. You can see there's a lot of willows up here, and I see some golden banner and some yarrow that I'm going to go check out here in a minute, but I did want to give you kind of a 360 view of where I'm standing right at the moment here on the top of Guanella Pass. Here I am at the top of Guanella Pass, and I just found a plant that I'm a little surprised to see in the middle to end of July, and this is called Golden Banner, and it's in the pea family, and you can tell that it's in the pea family by looking at its flowers. It has these yellow flowers that are very pea-like. Lots of times you'll see pea plants and related species with pink or white flowers, but this one's got yellow flowers. And again, it's called Golden Banner. And it is an early bloomer, so it's kind of cool to see it right now. Although it looks like some of the seed pods have already started to develop. It's a perennial that grows to about 2 feet tall. And it likes, a lot of times, disturbed sites. You'll find it in open gravelly areas, but you'll also find it in meadows and often along roadsides. This one you'll find growing from the foothills all the way up to the subalpine, although actually right here we are in the alpine life zone. So it's a highly adaptive plant. And right here next to the Golden Banner is one of our most common wildflowers. This is western or common yarrow. There's also an alpine yarrow that grows much shorter. The western or common yarrow typically grows to about 3 feet tall, and it has these tiny white flower clusters, and it's kind of in a really dense, flat-topped umbel. This one kind of flowers all season long, and it's very common in disturbed areas. It has these pinnately dissected leaves that look very much like feathers, and it's a very aromatic species. The one thing I do want to point out about white flowers in particular, especially in the alpine zones, is that white flowers often will attract generalist pollinators, and this is particularly important in the subalpine and alpine areas where we have really low pollinator activity and low pollinator diversity. And so these plants that have white flowers do a really great job of attracting pollinators in general. And so as we go through our hikes, you'll see that we end up seeing a lot of different flowers that are white. And again, this one was western or common yarrow. So one of the things you'll notice up on Guanella Pass, and really any place that's subalpine or alpine, is this kind of growth of trees. They're called Krummholz, which means crooked tree in German. And really, this patch of trees, and there's several of them here at the top of Guanella Pass, that are deformed vegetation, and they're shaped by the continual exposure to winds that are fierce and cold and freezing, and they really can only survive when they're sheltered by rocks and snow coverage. The lower portion of the tree continues to grow, but the upper part doesn't as much, and so they become extremely dense at the bottom, where they're a bit more protected, but are very short in general, and you'll see them growing in these groups. And this is called Krumholtz. And here I'm looking off to the distance to Old Baldy and Perry's Peak in the distance. Now here we have alpine sunflower, and there's two species of this. It's tetrameris. One's called Old Man of the Mountain, and the other one's called Woolly Actinella. But they're both alpine sunflowers, and they have really huge, showy flowers, and they're usually three-toothed, which I think maybe you can see here. And they flower July to August usually, sometimes in June. They're silvery white often. Underneath you can kind of see the woolly hairs on it. And these you're going to find high meadows, ridges, slopes, exposed areas. And there's quite a few actually out here, kind of just dotting the whole hillside. A very pretty sunflower that brightens up the meadow. So for about the last year and a half or so, I've been working on a little project, and it's a plant booklet specifically for Clear Creek County, and it's called Subalpine and Alpine Wildflowers of Clear Creek County. So it focuses on plants that are at high elevation, usually above 10,000 feet, although some of these you'll easily find in the plains, foothills, or montane life zones as well. And I'm hoping that this will be a very useful booklet for those of you who like to get out, explore, and look at wildflowers. So here's a look at what the booklet looks like. It's called Alpine and Subalpine Wildflowers of Clear Creek County. And as I mentioned, I hope this will be a useful tool for those of you who like to go on wildflower hikes and try to identify those flowers that you see along your hikes. Again, this book focuses mostly on those that are growing at higher elevations. At some point we may add in some more of the montane flowers, although a lot of the plants will grow across different life zones, so there will be some plants in here that you can find at lower elevations. And one of those, for example, is this plant right next to me that we can try to identify using the booklet. So the first thing you'd want to do is turn to the yellow section. And here we are, and kind of start looking through the pictures for something that might look somewhat like what you've got. And here I've got a plant that has bright yellow flowers with 5 rounded petals. And so that sounds like maybe what I've got. So I take a look at the flowers, and yes, it looks like I've got 5 rounded yellow petals. It has papery sepals. You could check for that underneath the petals. It flowers June to September, which we're in the middle of July, so that's a match. It has narrow, grayish, hairy leaflets, which if you take a look at the plant, they do have a little bit of a gray tinge to them. They are a little bit hairy, so that sounds good. It's a shrub, 1 to 3 feet tall, and we definitely have a shrub here. And I would say this one's 2 feet, maybe a little taller. You find this in clearings, moist meadows, and woods. Well, we're kind of in a clearing right here, and so that's a match. And this one grows foothills to alpine, so this one you can pretty much find growing wherever. And so I think, based on all the criteria, that we've been able to identify shrubby cinquefoil. And if I remember right, I think I pointed this one out to you in our demonstration garden and mentioned that it's very ubiquitous throughout Clear Creek County, and you can find it growing so many different locations. So this is definitely one you will find on almost any wildflower hike. Next to the shrubby cinquefoil, we have another cinquefoil, or potentilla. This one is herbaceous, and there's many different species that grow up here in the mountains, and using this booklet as reference can help you identify which one you're actually seeing. Little collection of stone crop. I can't remember if I've talked about this one or not, but it's the succulent. It's very low growing. It has these kind of reddish green leaves. but it is definitely a succulent, and usually you'll find it growing in kind of dry, exposed areas, rock outcrops, and you can see this growing at much lower elevations too. It's a very adaptable species, which is kind of cool here. This one's not flowering yet, but just such a nice big clump of it right here among the bistort, the mountain dryad, and the alpine avens. So here we have a really pretty little patch of paintbrush. There's two different species of paintbrush that grow in this area that have this yellowish, whitish color. There's western yellow paintbrush and sulfur paintbrush. Now, the western yellow paintbrush looks very similar to the sulfur paintbrush, although it tends to grow at higher elevations than the other. And so, given that we're at 11.6, it's a good bet that this is the western yellow paintbrush. What's interesting about the paintbrush is that the flowers are very inconspicuous. It's the sepals that give the color to the paintbrushes. This you'll find flowering kind of all summer, July to September. And this particular plant is unbranching and will grow to about 8 inches tall. And you'll find it on the tundra, on hills, meadows, open forests. And right here, it's within a thicket of willows, as you can see. Here's a plant sometimes you kind of have to really be on the lookout for because it's hidden under other things. This is the mountain blue violet. And it's so short, but so pretty. It's a perennial. It grows to maybe 5 inches, although usually they're much shorter. The flowers are single and nodding. And this one will flower kind of spring through summer, so you can see this kind of any time on your hikes if you're looking for it. A lot of times it grows in meadows, aspen groves, and streamside. And you can find this from kind of the montane life zone all the way up to alpine. Again, just a really cute little plant. I didn't know if I'd find this today, but here's another violet, a native violet that we have growing. This one's yellow prairie violet. And the last one I showed you was a blue violet. This one's a very small plant, just like the other one. It blooms kind of spring through summer, so you can have the opportunity to see it pretty much all season long. This one you'll find growing kind of throughout all the life zones except maybe alpine. It likes open hillsides, fields, and of course prairies, given its name. It has these bright yellow petals, and the leaves are kind of lance-shaped. And again, it looks very similar to our blue one, just with a beautiful little yellow flower. Here we have a couple flowers growing together. We've got sandwort, which is the white one with the delicate little white flowers, and we have wallflower growing next to it that has the bright yellow flowers. Now, often you'll see the wallflower in orange colors. I tend to see that at lower elevations. It's a bit more orangey. At high elevations, it seems to be a bit more bright yellow in color. This one is one of our earliest bloomers, so you know spring has arrived when you start to see wallflower. The leaves are mostly basal, and it's an erect stem that's unbranching. It can get up to maybe about 1.5 feet tall, and you'll find this one on rocky slopes, hillsides, ridges, and forest openings. What's interesting about this plant, it's in the mustard family, and when it goes to seed, it produces these really unique seed pods. They're called siliques, as you can see right here. And once they mature and you can pop them open, you'll see just tiny little seeds within each of these seed pods. Now, the other plant growing here, as I said, is a sandwort. The flowers are really in this open cluster, as you can see here. It's not very dense. The flowers are kind of spread out. This one will flower through September. And this one has really interesting leaves. They're kind of grass-like and very stiff, and they can grow quite long, up to 3 inches or so. This plant grows to maybe 1 foot, and you can find this one in the foothills all the way up to the alpine life zone. Here's another ubiquitous plant called field mouse ear. You can find this one growing from the plains all the way up to alpine area where we're at now. The flowers are in these loose clusters, and they have these white petals that are deeply cleft, which is kind of a telltale sign that you've got mouse ear. The leaves are opposite and linear, and this plant can grow to about 10 inches tall, and sometimes you'll find it in large patches. It likes dry areas, gravelly slopes, and forest openings. Here's another pretty purple flower called Jacob's Ladders. And Jacob Ladder, there's a couple different species of this one. This is one you'll find commonly growing underneath pine trees. I think it likes the shade and maybe a little extra moisture that it gets from being underneath the pine trees. It has these light blue to lavender pointed petals, and it has hairy sepals. And you can really tell this species by the leaves. Jacob's ladder, and it really does resemble a ladder, which is pretty cool. These are pretty common. You can find these usually on any hike, and they'll flower anywhere from June to August. So really, this one you'll see all summer long, although I tend to see them a little bit more earlier in the season. This one can grow to about 10 inches. And if I find some of the other Jacob's Ladder, you'll see that other species grow much taller. And often they will grow out more in the sunshine. And here, of course, is one of, I think, everybody's favorite, the Colorado columbine. It has these 5 blue to lavender sepals. They're not petals, they're sepals. And then the petals are actually the white in the center. And they're kind of scoop-shaped, and there's 5 of them. And these flowers, as most of you know, can get quite large, up to maybe 3 inches across. And they're beautiful. These can flower from June to August, depending kind of on your elevation. And they do like a little bit moister soils, usually in ravines, or sometimes you can find them on rocky slopes. I tend to see them a lot under aspen groves and also willow thickets. They're pretty common. This one, of course, will grow in a wide variety of life zones from the foothills all the way to the alpine. And there is an alpine columbine, and if I find that, that'll be awesome. But for right now, we're looking at the Colorado columbine, and I'll show you how many there are right in this area. They're mixed in with some geraniums and some of the wallflower. There's a lot more of the wallflower I was talking about earlier. Just a nice mix of wildflowers. Here's one of my favorite flowers, the red anemone, Anemone multifida. And this one, usually I don't find them looking very red. Usually they look more this pink or magenta color. And like the columbine, this really colorful part of the plant or of the flower is actually its sepals, not its petals. And this one will flower May to August, but a lot of times you'll see it a little bit earlier in the season. It has these really beautifully dissected leaves, and they tend to grow in clumps. Sometimes they can grow up to maybe 18 inches in height, but usually I find them not much more than 12 inches. These again have a wide variety of life zones that they'll tolerate, foothills all the way up to alpine. And you'll find these in rocky and dry meadows, forest openings, grassy slopes, and sometimes even roadside. But they're so pretty. This is the red anemone. So now I just kind of circled around this pine tree that had the Jacob's Ladder and the wallflower growing kind of underneath it, and I found a valerian species. We have 3, I believe, in Clear Creek County, and this one looks like it's the tall valerian. It has these flowers in stalked clusters, and they kind of form this open panicle that you can see here. The flowers are white, and you'll usually see it flowering July to August. And so it's now just starting to flower. The leaves are pretty fleshy, as you can see here, and they almost look like they have white edges if you see it in the field. They're green, but the edges of them just look like they have a slight, either light green or white color to them. This one can grow up to 2 feet tall, and a lot of times you'll find this in wet meadows, tundras, and slopes. And this one likes to grow a little bit higher than some of the others. This one usually you'll find from montane up to alpine. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on the flowers to see if we can focus so you can see those open panicles. You can see the Jacob's ladder underneath the tree back there with the wallflower just behind this valerian. Kind of a neat plant. And here I just turned around from looking at the valerian and I found some dusky penstemon. See how beautiful that is? Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as dusky beard tongue, and either one is correct. It's a penstemon whipplianus is its scientific name. And a lot of times, I think usually, you'll find it in this deep purple color that you're seeing here. Although often, if you look hard enough, you might find some white ones, which is pretty cool. Now again, this tends to grow in a little bit more disturbed sites sometimes. I see it in road cuts, a lot of times forest clearings, talus slopes, but you can also find it growing in meadows, kind of like I've found it here. This one will flower a little bit later in the season, July to September. It has opposite leaves, and this one can get to about 2 feet tall. This one right here is maybe about a foot. You can see the valerian behind it with the little bit of white-edged leaves. And this one usually you won't find below subalpine. So this is definitely one of our high elevation loving plants. Just really beautiful. And here we have alpine sandwort. It forms these really cool moss-like plants that grow super close to the ground. The flowers are single and pretty small. They've got 5 petals. See if I can zoom in a little bit so you can see them. Very pretty little plant. And again, it hugs the ground. It's definitely an alpine plant. Loves high elevation. And as I said, it's mat forming. It doesn't really grow much more than 2 inches tall. So often you have to look for it, but a lot of times it'll be in rock crevices. And so it's pretty easy to spot coming right out of those crevices. And this one happens to be growing right at the base of our valerian that we've already seen. And there's quite a bit of that out here as well, including this alpine sandwort. And right next to it, we've got mountain parsley. Now this one can sometimes grow a bit taller than this, but this one's probably only a couple inches tall. And it's got these divided leaves. And it's a kind of early bloomer. You'll see this earlier in the season usually. And that has this kind of flat umbel top. And pretty unique looking. From a distance it might look like a dandelion because that's that same color yellow. But when you get up close to it, you'll notice that it's mountain parsley. Very pretty little plant. And right here we have just a tiny little plant. Supposedly it can get to 8 inches tall. I've never seen it that tall. This is rock jasmine. And it has this basal rosette of leaves. And they're just really tiny. This plant we're looking at here is probably maybe 2 inches tall, tops. And the flowers are in umbels. And they're some tended by bracts, which you can't really see here. But It's this really pretty little white flower, kind of with a little bit of a yellow center. And again, see if I can focus in on that. This one will flower May to August, so kind of all summer long. It has these wiry stems, which I'm not sure if you can see, but they're very slender and very wiry. And these you can find growing in meadows, in the tundra, forest openings, and even in disturbed areas. And I have some of this coming up wild in my garden at home, so I think that must count as a disturbed area. But here it is, and there's actually a lot of it in here. There's another little plant, a little bit over here. Just very pretty. And then I just was going to show you the slope here where we saw the columbines and the wallflower growing. Another thing I wanted to mention about Guanella Pass is if you're looking for a great place to hike and you're not familiar with Guanella Pass, this is definitely some place you should check out. Again, there's Mount Beardstadt in the back. There's a lot of trails, both at the top up here, both easy and challenging, that are great for both views and for wildflowers. But also, as you come up from Georgetown, there's a lot of new places to pull over and new trails to check out. And so I would highly recommend, if you're looking for some place to come do a day hike, to come to Guanella Pass and check it out. Just don't come this late in the afternoon because, as you can see, and as most of you know, the thunderstorms start to pop up in mid to late afternoon, and then hiking is not quite as much fun. Here's a beautiful flower called orange sneezeweed, and it seems to be really abundant up here on Guanella Pass. I did not include this in the alpine, subalpine wildflower book for Clear Creek County because usually you find this one more commonly in the western half of the state. But now that I see how abundantly it's growing up here, it'll definitely have to be included in the next edition of our booklet. But anyway, this plant is usually grows quite tall compared to a lot of the plants that we find at this elevation. It can grow up to 4 feet tall, and it has lance-shaped leaves that are alternately attached on the stem. You can find it growing from the foothills all the way up to subalpine and a little bit in alpine apparently, because that's where I'm at right now. And sneezeweed, the name sneezeweed actually refers to an irritation, a sinus irritation that the pollen can actually cause in some of us. And as you can see, it likes to grow in these big groups, and the plants produce many flower heads on one single plant. And this plant is called sneezeweed. And again, this is growing very abundantly here on Guanella Pass. Here I've come down in elevation just a little bit, and now I'm stream side, as you can see. And I found this little plant here that looks like lovage. And lovage, like some of the others I've talked about, like the yarrow that's in the background there, have this umbel of white flowers clustered upon its stem. This one will flower later in season, just starting about now to August. And it can grow to maybe 3 feet, maybe a little higher. And you'll often find it in meadows, forest ravines, and openings, and aspen groves. And again, sometimes it's hard to tell some of these plants apart. There's the yarrow again, and the lovage. And hopefully the little booklet that we've created will help you be able to identify the differences in some of these look-alike plants. So, as I mentioned, I'm at a little bit lower elevation right now, and stream side, still here up on Guanella Pass. And luckily for us, the storm is now blowing over, and we have blue skies, so we can continue on and see what other flowers we can find. Ooh, look what I just found. I found star gentian. We've got several different species of these in Clear Creek County, but this one's called star gentian, and it's such a cool flower. The flowers are actually stellate, which means star-shaped, and they're very dark to bluish purple, and they're clustered, as you can see here. They flower usually just about this time, July to September, so not an early season bloomer. The leaves are mostly basal in a rosette. You can see that here. There are some, however, that come up the stem, and they will be opposite if you're trying to identify it. This one grows to about 1.5 feet tall. These right here, oh, maybe they're 12 feet, maybe they're as high as 1.5 feet. You'll find this one in wet meadows and bogs and marshes, which of course is where we're at right now. You can hear the little creek behind me. And you can find this beautiful plant from the montane to alpine life zones. It's such a beautiful cluster right here, just starting to flower. Here we have star gentian again, and it's actually being pollinated at this very moment, which is super exciting to see. And something interesting about subalpine and alpine plants is those that have blue or purple flowers, such as this one, tend to trap more heat than lighter colored flowers. They tend to attract bumblebees, which out of the limited number of pollinators we have in the alpine areas, bumblebees are one of the more common ones, just because they can be active at lower temperatures than a lot of the other pollinators or insects can actually tolerate. And I'm not sure where our little bee went. I must have spooked him. But again, purple flowers, blue flowers help trap heat. And a lot of times these will attract bumblebees because they're so common in the alpine areas relative to other insects.